Welcome back to the Time Capsule Show podcast, where we tell stories of the 21st century through people just like you and me. My name is Joenrhuz.
And I'm Vanessa.
And today we have filmmaker, producer, director, and host of the Corona Chronicles, the podcast, Eden Martinez. Welcome, Eden.
Welcome.
I feel so welcomed. It's hard for me to contain it in the context of the Zoom. I think we're gonna have
I wish we were in person.
Some bouncers here. Yeah.
Well, welcome to the show, Eden. I love everything that you do. You're a very creative person, seeing from your background. So can you just tell us more about yourself, where you're from, what do you do, what inspired you to do what you do?
Sure. Yeah, I have an interesting background in that, well, first I was born and raised in New York, which if you know New York, that is actually a pretty rare thing these days. People, for the most part, like everyone I grew up with that actually was born here has moved, or like, you know, they've just like sort of drastically changed. Like the majority of people that, even the friends that I have, are people who have moved here. So I had this like unique background of living in New York and being exposed to arts and culture very young, and specifically being exposed to film very young. Like I kind of knew I wanted to be a filmmaker at 12, which is like curse and a blessing. Like, you know, it's sort of like, okay, I'm going to be doing this for the rest of my life. Oh, wow, I've been doing this my entire life. So it's given me a lot of time to, you know, I would say, I guess, maybe hone my point of view, but I think the bigger thing is probably to like not be afraid of change. Especially in the last couple of years, I've just been really exploratory about how I approach art and not being afraid to try new things. You know, I've really started, in my bread and butter was like branded content, which is a lot of that documentary style stuff now that we see online all the time, to doing commercials. And then I was like, okay, well, I know I want to do narrative. What does that look like? And then, you know, I was doing comedies, which I still love comedies, but it's been interesting to sort of lean into now doing more, and I use big quotes around this because I think tonally I'll always like have a little bit of a funny bone. It's not a little funny bone, it's a huge funny bone. And just wanting to like make sure people enjoy an experience. But now leaning into what are the issues that are close to my heart and how can I use this medium that I have access to speak to those issues. So that's a little bit about me. Do you have any other, does that dig deep enough?
I think so, and we'll dig deeper later. So what are those issues that you're telling us about? What are those stories that you want to tell through your creations?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I, you know, right now the project that I have going on is really for Pride Month. It's really LGBTQ focused, so we can talk about that later. But that's certainly one of the issues that's close to me because I was raised in like a very, very religious community that was very shame driven, and I didn't come out till I was much older. And like, you know, of course, thankfully, I, you know, was able to sort of embrace myself. But I do think there is a reality that we don't talk about that isn't just contained within the LGBTQ community. It's just like the idea of telling anybody this is how you have to live your life, because it's like, no, we all have the right to be loved and accepted, no matter how we choose to live our lives. So I think that's sort of one of the bigger issues that I'm really passionate about, especially in media, like just trying to bring that at the forefront as a person of color as well. I'm Puerto Rican, so like even that, like the intersectionality of my story, I think also played into it. Like I'm second generation Puerto Rican. Like what does that mean? That means like I came from a family of people who were still suffering from the results of colonialism. And I can see a lot of that in my story and just feeling like, oh, we need to subscribe and conform to this thing because community is all we have. Like, and we have to assimilate and we have to fit in. And that affects a lot of about things you feel like you can achieve. So I'm really passionate about those two topics, as well as sexual assault. I think is just like something, I was assaulted as a child. So I've become very, very passionate. And that's sort of something where storytelling, I'm still figuring out there's no right medium for that. It's so hard. But it's certainly become something with when I have free time, something that I'm like donating my time to, is trying to figure out how to communicate my survivor story, trying to work with other survivors. So those are sort of the issue-based things that I'm really passionate about communicating through storytelling and through various mediums, mostly film at the moment, but I've found podcasts to be a really compelling vehicle to do that with as well.
Wow, that's amazing that you're using your own personal story and translating it into film or whatever creative outlets that you have for yourself. What struggles did you face in trying to translate your story into these creative outlets?
Yeah, I mean, I it's such a fascinating question because I feel like I hear a lot of I don't. Let me not talk about other artists. Let me talk about me. That's what I should be doing, right? Um, for me, I think the biggest issue I've had to overcome is actually the psychological pressure of like not wanting to hurt the people closest to me by sharing my story. Like the film I worked on recently, I share my coming out story and some of the like oppression that I dealt with growing up. And all I could think was like, man, I really hope my this doesn't hurt my mom. Like, yes, there was an aspect of that maybe uh, she didn't have the capacity to parent me in a way that would allow me to make space for me to be queer. Like she just didn't have those tools because she wasn't given those tools by her parents. And I can now, as someone who's like post therapy and like living in a woke world, I can look at our story and see it that way. But I could also see from her perspective as like a person who's moving through the world with empathy, where hearing me share my story would be so hard, like to think that you're a part of holding your child back. That's really scary. And I think it's necessary. I think we all, I think if we all started bridging the gap, especially with parents and family members, of just looking at those relationships and saying like, you guys are humans. I can have grace for your story, but I need you to be a part of my story too. Like I'm helping our family move forward. I'm helping break the cycles that have been in our family for years. So I'm not saying like I'm not blaming you for this. I've moved on from that, but I need you to be aware of the pain that I went through so we can look at what our new relationship looks like. So I think that still is like a thing I wrestle with really hard as I talk about any of these things, is just never wanting my family to feel like I am rejecting them or alienating them or like throwing them under the bus. Like, no, these things happen. They're in the past. Like I'm able to speak about them because I'm not carrying them with me, you know, because I've worked really hard to process them and live my life in a way, you know, as not without the victim mindset, you know, with the like survivor's mindset. So I hope that makes sense. That's a very convoluted answer.
It
Yeah.
does, but I really do admire your story and that you're so passionate about too. Going through a very similar struggle myself, not with um like being assaulted, but going through like mental health overall. So it's not easy to overcome, and for that I really applaud you for that.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, and I guess I do want to make the distinction. Like my story, I've had so many luxuries, like that I knew. That I encountered people who were like, "Oh, have you considered this? Have you considered talking to a therapist? Have you considered?" And that I could afford to do that. And then I could find that I could know to, you know, I went through 3 or 4 therapists before I found the right one. Like that's such a luxury, you know. So I don't, you know, I overcome. I don't know if I'll ever like overcome these things as much as like not letting them define me, which I think is super important in any trauma. Right. I think we all experience trauma, and like even this year was traumatic, and if nothing else, like it was a shared trauma, which is insane that we all around the world have been experiencing the loss of the year that we planned, the loss of, uh, you know, just the loss of family memories for kids. Like I was filming at this graduation the other day, and I was like, oh my god, like these kids lost their last year of high school.
Yeah,
that's crazy. You know, that's like probably for me that was the most memorable year. Like how traumatic is it to live through that, and then after you got to go to college like and deal with and be in person, like it's a lot. So I think acknowledging trauma and not letting it define you is super important no matter what the trauma is.
yeah, I agree with that.
If you weren't doing filmmaking, let's say you were doing something else that wasn't necessarily in the creative fields that you are in now, what would you be doing and why would you be doing it?
I probably would have gone to law school and I would have run for political office, which I still think about sometimes. Like, I come from a family of activists, specifically like my grandparents were very big activists in the Lower East Side, and were very involved in like some of the first like grassroots political parties in this neighborhood. And my grandmother ran for office. So like it's funny, we used to like what I used to do as a kid is like I would like stage courtroom cases with my cousins. Like that would be we had a house in Pennsylvania, and we'd go and we'd be like, guys, we're gonna put on a courtroom case. I'm gonna be a lawyer, and like that's so like the idea of like getting a little bit performative, but also just like I think I've always really appreciated for whatever you can say about our country, and obviously we have like a long ways to go in terms of progress, but I think like the ability to have a system that we can actually engage in and change is like so accessible to us. I think we're like, I've sort of always known it. Like I've always understood how my vote, it was the first thing I did this morning. I woke up at 6 a.m, walked my dog, and went to vote. You know, it's like I've always understood like the power that I have as a citizen to engage with the system. If I want to run for the community board, what that could mean. You know, if I have an issue ever, my first reaction is always like, what representative do I need to email? Like I had an issue last year with my license, and I emailed my senator, and he like within like a day like was helping me solve it. You know, just because I'm a voter, and as a voter, like that's the power that I contain is like they want my vote, well then I want your service. You know, and it's an exchange. So that's something I still think about sometimes.
Wow, I didn't think you can just email representatives like that. I mean,
yes,
I had a lot of issues growing up. I didn't think they were that accessible, to be honest.
They're super accessible because even if you can't get to them, you'll get to someone in their staff, and someone in their staff is always aware. And you also have to like, I think not just you, but just in general, like I think people don't realize how many people don't engage their representation. And the people that do engage their representation, typically, those are the people that are defining what's happening in the neighborhood. So I feel like I can always tell who's running the neighborhood based on the priorities that are being taken. You know, for instance, like the small business community in the Lower East Side they're not running the community board, but they are at community board meetings because like they need liquor licenses, they need to make sure, or recently, like in last year with the SBA loans, like things like that, like typically businesses are the ones that are the most invested in that stuff, but ordinary citizens have just as much power and just as much of a voice. So I think it's super important, if nothing else, to at least know, particularly who like is on your community board, because those are the people who will directly get back to you pretty quickly because their responsibilities are much more manageable than like a state senator or, you know, whoever else. Yeah.
You mentioned that you were also involved in the film and the arts. Did you have any idols growing up in the arts that you looked up to growing up as a kid?
Yes. I think my first, I feel like I idolized films and therefore would idolize the people that make those films. Like Jurassic Park is still my favorite film, and Steven Spielberg I idolized for a long time, and I still idolize him just for different reasons now. Where as I got older, I remember reading Robert Rodriguez's book and about El Mariachi, and like that was he was the first filmmaker that I was like, oh, I idolize this person and their process. I idolize that there's nothing that would stop them from doing the thing they wanted to do. So Robert Rodriguez was definitely like, as an artist, someone I really admired. And you asked about before, right? Like who was an influence?
Like from any moment, from past to now.
Oh, from past to now. And I guess like, it's funny now, I think the people that I idolize, like Wong Kar-wai, who's this like amazing approach cinematically to tell stories that just feel so big, but are so small, like are these like very intimate tales, but visually they feel so complex. I had one more. I might have to look it up and then I will answer this question because it's like a very good one. And it's someone that like people don't think about, who's a filmmaker and who I think everybody should know.
So speaking of past and present, we're now at the segment of the show we would like to call Past, Present, and Future, where we'll be exploring 3 different periods of your life. So how do you see yourself now, and how does it compare to the person you were 5 years ago?
Yeah, that's so funny. So I see myself now as someone who is so much in their own skin that sometimes I think it's like, I've always been a fairly confident person, but I don't think it was always matched with like inner confidence. Now I really do move through the world with like moving like from my gut. Like I am not a person who operates best when they have done 3 months of research on something. I'm a person who operates best when I've been like ruminating on things and like living with them and then like throwing it all away and just like moving from the gut. Where before, I feel like 5 years ago, especially, I feel like I was working very hard to be like people around, to be like the success stories I had seen around me, you know, as opposed to being in search and existing with myself enough to like just love the giftings that I have to lean into and to lean into those. So that's probably and then the mental health stuff is a big thing. I was definitely operating a space where I was, big quotes, where I was successful, but very unhappy, you know? So I have so much more stability and peace around where I am now, as opposed to where I was then.
And how do you think things will be in the next 5 years for you?
Yeah, I mean, in the next 5 years, I will have made a feature film. So it's almost like difficult to say like where I will even be. Like hopefully I'll be writing a script on a beach with a cocktail. Like that's that's the like
what cocktail?
A Paloma. Right now, a Paloma, which a Paloma with a Tajin rim. With Casamigos tequila. That's been my go-to recently. My best friend introduced me to that when I was on vacation a couple weeks ago, and I was like, "Why do I even drink anything else? I don't know."
Do you have a dream? Do you have a dream location that you want to go to?
Yeah, dream location is always Puerto Rico. Even though I've been there so many times, it's just like it's the perfect place, and I can never quite explain what I feel like when I'm there. Like there is this like energy of my ancestors that like ruminates through when I'm there. And I imagine a lot of people feel this when they go to a place that is even remotely connected to the history of their themselves or their people. Like Puerto Rico, yeah, when I'm there, it's really freaky. Like the minute I get off the plane, and a couple years ago I went by myself and was just like exploring, which was like very intimidating because I had family there, but Puerto Rico is not like, you know, it's not like New York. I'm like not taking a train anywhere, you know? Yeah, there's no subway. Like my family was 2 hours away, you know? So and I really made it a point to just hit all the interesting things that I was curious about. And I never encountered people who were so kind and generous and giving and just open and like didn't want anything in return. And I've always felt like that's an aspect that I've seen in my family, but I never understood it as a cultural aspect. It's like, no, like this is actually how people in Puerto Rico are. Like there is just this giving, loving nature because it's a small enough place where community is everybody you meet. So
that's true.
Yeah. So I think it's really dope.
So like what principles or other principles do you live your life by?
Looking at life as experiences, and that's not just in terms of creating art. It's also like even romantic relationships. Like I used to like date and be like, I need to get married this person. It's like, no, I am meeting this person. I'm having an experience. We are sharing an experience. What can I give to them? What can they share with me? And even in friendships, like things come and go. So this idea of impermanence has definitely been a value that's been super close to my heart, of just like being okay with change and not just, change in situations, change in relationships, change in myself. Like the scariest thing to me would be like if in 5 years somebody was like, oh, you're exactly the same. That would be terrifying. It's like, no, I am not the same. You know how much work I've done to like grow, and like I want to meet other people and like understand their beliefs. And if I have something that I need to work on in myself, I want to be willing to be humble enough to say like, no, I was wrong. Like I had to grow in this area. And because it was exposed to this situation or this person, that encouraged me to change. I think that's it for I mean, and then I think values go hand in hand with practices. So when I was younger, like prayer was such a big part of my life, and now that's become meditation and like having mantras and starting my day in that way and letting those things speak into the values that I have for the day that I'm living, like being very present.
Wow, that's so powerful. And that's so true. Like the only constant in life is change. And I love how you transformed, you know, you did prayers when you were younger. Now it's meditation for you. I feel like that really centers anyone and their energy and their soul.
Yeah, definitely. How do you say it? Like the fact that you always, from what I'm understanding, is that you use affirmations to help you like motivate yourself in a way throughout the day, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like that's actually very useful and helpful to get yourself throughout the whole entire day, regardless.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that what I was like saying before about energy too, I think like you're, you know, I really think your thoughts will dictate what you put out and what you get back. So if I'm focused on I will be successful, I don't need to define what that means. Like my success in a day might just be I went to my boxing class, we did this, I'm gonna play Call of Duty with my best friend. Like that's a freaking successful day. Like what's wrong with that day? And then tomorrow it might be, you know, I have a film I'm working on, and it's like, oh, I completely re-edited this film, and I like put together a press kit, and I'm like, but those days are equally valuable. Like one gets me to the other. So, so yeah, just like living in that way, I think has been super helpful. Yeah.
So, speaking of your job, your family overall, what are you grateful for in life?
I am grateful for impermanence. Like I am grateful for this thing that's like a value that like honestly I think I spent so many years being afraid of whether I communicated it or not. I wasn't I was like willing to lead into change, but like kind of afraid of that idea. So I'm really grateful for like the ebbs and flows of life. Like I'm grateful for failure and I'm grateful for success equally. You know, I don't think I would understand one without the other. I'm grateful for joy. I'm grateful for suffering. Like I think just like looking at the peaks and valleys of life, live out. We're like living. We're all living art. You know, our lives are all living art. So I'm really grateful for that. I'm also super grateful for my dog, who was chewing under me on God knows what. But she's very cute.
Aww.
Yeah.
Is your dog there with you now?
She is, yeah. I heard her chewing. I'm pretty sure you don't hear it because of the way the mic is. But it's but yeah, she's having a grand old time down there.
Aw.
So you know what really stood out for me there when he said you're grateful for impermanence, and that's so powerful. Like I feel like I'm talking to a philosopher here. Like, are you like Socrates Reborn or something?
Yeah. How did you know? Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Well, like speaking of impermanence, is there anything that you think shouldn't change in life? Do you think some things should just stay the same?
Maybe. I mean, I think for me, I think like the idea of your consciousness and awareness, like my consciousness and awareness, like that. I don't know how much that. I think it evolves, but in terms of changes, like it's tough for me to say it changes and like being a. No, I you know what? F that. No, I don't. I don't think anything changes. I think everything changes. I really do. I think I mean, even that, I was like, oh, like, I've always kind of had that. I've always kind of like had that, but like even that's changed and evolved. So like, you know, I really think, I think change is like super important to lean into. Cause I think if you don't, I really think it causes a lot of suffering, unnecessary suffering. So no.
I find it interesting. I find it interesting that you said that you value failure and success because correct me if I'm wrong. Excuse me. That for me personally, you can't move on in life without learning both sides, or else you can't improve personally. So I kind of agree with that.
Yeah. No. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's no way. I mean, if you don't fail, how will you learn how to succeed? No one does one thing and is suddenly, or it's very unlikely that you do one thing and then someone's like, hand that person $1 billion and like give them a business and like, no, you have to go through the process of, oh, I did this, it didn't work. Oh, I did this, and these 3 things worked, and these 2 things didn't. So I'm not going to do those 2 again. Let me try like pivoting and. You only, and the people who I admire have like, especially like have gone through and are going through that process. And even the most successful person who you admire has probably failed hundreds of times It's their ability to look at it and not say it's a negative thing. You could acknowledge it for what it is. You know what I mean? If you do something and people just hate it, you know what I mean? Like that's something to consider. And it doesn't mean you have to feel the same. It's just walking away with a healthy outlook of what's next and why you're doing what you're doing, which is so important. Is like, that's the minute you stop enjoying it, stop doing it. Don't, like, life's too short to
Definitely.
Don't stress over it.
Yeah. Learn from your mistakes, but still live in the moment.
Yes, exactly, Vanessa. Yes.
But yeah, sorry.
Go ahead, Vanessa.
There's still a quote. There's a quote, like I think I believe that people can learn from this as well, and I'm sure it's very common as well. Is if at first you don't succeed, try again. So I think that's a very common quote everyone's probably still applies to today. So
never give up.
Yeah, never give up.
If you fall 6 times, get up a 7th.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you'll probably fall 10 more after that, but still get up then. Yeah.
So I love how this conversation's going. We spoke a lot about change, and within this century, so many things have changed, and the things that represent this century also change as time goes on. So if you were to put something in a time capsule for people to dig up 100 years later, what would you put in there and why?
Yes. So I have kept all of the journals that I've had, like, which and they've just been poetry and writing. And I have the first one that I ever wrote. It's probably the best. And it's just like a book of songs and poems and like ideas. And also it's like I have had no separation in my life. So then it's also just like journal entries as well. I would definitely like put that, because I think it's the thing that gives you, especially, I guess I didn't realize, like, or maybe I just didn't write as much as I thought, but like in the course of that journal, like my and I had like fallen in love for the first time, and like I was traveling, like I went to Egypt for the first time, like all of these things happened in this, like one of the first journals I had. So I feel like it gives you the best picture of how it gave me the best picture of how I react and experience just about everything. And obviously I've changed, my reactions have probably changed, but I think it gives you such a picture of like not only me, but like of the world as it was, in relation to my life. So that would be it. And also just it's like moody and like thoughtful.
Aw.
Yeah.
So is there anything is there anything else you'd like to add or tell our viewers? Where can our viewers find you on social media?
A few places. So Eden Mart 11 is my Instagram. I think I have other social media, but I don't really use it. Just find me on Instagram, shoot me a message. I also have a Facebook. It's Eden Martinez. You can just go to edenmartinez.com to find my work. And if you're in New York, through June 30th, I have a short documentary playing on Fifth Avenue. It's at 505 Fifth Avenue at the store called And Other Stories. It's called In and Out, and it's a commemoration film for Pride. And it's 5 coming out stories. They're intercut. It's a 10-minute film. And it's playing like in a theater-like setting. And there's also a front window display. And like go or email me and I'll go with you. Like I live 15 minutes away on my bike and we can like talk about life. But definitely keep in touch on social media. I like love the interactions I've had there, particularly around the project that I just talked about.
Well, everyone, you heard it. Go follow Eden on social media and make sure to follow all of her work on social media as well. So Eden, thanks so much for being a part of our time capsule. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in. Please make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Tune in again next time to meet another amazing addition to our time capsule. Bye.
Bye.